were really engaging with this content. And I ask that you share this with somebody. Let's tell somebody about this. Let's talk about this. And I've been talking for a little bit past couple of days about King Piankhy and talking about just his conquest of ancient Kemet, about various things that he did with his life, and really something about his family a little bit. But I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper in him, because I think as we think about the Kushite royalty and Kushite family tree, it's important for us to know names. So I want to share some names to kind of dig in, because King Piankhy was a significant figure in history and a significant figure in Kushite history, in that he went and took over ancient Kemet and ruled his country really with grace and dignity. And as we talk about Kush, we're not going to talk about Kush in the terms of Kemet, just in the terms of Kemet. We want to talk about Kush in its own right. It was its own country, its own dynasty, its own people, its own thoughts, and it's not important because it knew somebody else. It wasn't important because of a neighbor, it was important of itself. So I want to talk a little bit about King Piankhy and his family tree as we kind of dig into this and look at the royalty and the line of the royalty in that Napata dynasty. I want to kind of pull up this video, this visual here, so you can kind of see and get some names, some names that you can maybe take down and take note of, and names that you'll be able to kind of look at and read through for yourself and be able to kind of know more. But we're going to talk about these folks. We're going to talk about a lot of these folks in depth, because there are many people here who are famous, who are well known, and we may not even know that we know them, right? So I want to kind of start off with Alara. So King Alara is considered to be the founder of the Napata dynasty. So we're talking about the 8th century BC. We're talking about 785 BC, and we're talking about Kush being its own ruler, if you will, and Kush being in a situation after the new kingdom, had taken over Kush for a period of time. There was a period of reorganization, and during that period of reorganization, the Kushite people then went ahead and organized its own dynasty. They organized a dynasty in Napata, and in Napata, right there around the third cataract and the fourth cataract of the Nile, is where they had the center of their business, the center of their capital, if you will, the center of their city, their country. And Alara was credited with really joining and uniting the forces in Upper Nubia. He was credited with doing that. He was someone who was able to bring together those whole forces, all of the groups of people and the faction of people that were there around the third cataract of the Nile, the fourth cataract, the fifth cataract. And as we start to kind of get some perspective as we think about that whole area from, you think around the sixth cataract near where Khartoum is now in modern day Sudan, up through Meroë, the sixth cataract where Napata is, and the ancient city of Kerma. Alara at the top there in 785 was credited with uniting that whole area and really starting this Napatan dynasty. So when we think about Napatan dynasties, or we think about dynasties in Kush, we should think about their dynasties. And the interesting thing about it, because as I think about this first Napatan dynasty, this first dynasty, if you will, of this renewed ancient Kush, this renewed Kush in the 8th century BC, when you look at it, they really only had two dynasties. If you think about it, they had a dynasty that lasted over 500 years, from about 785 to 275 BC, all before Christ, more than 500 years, and that was centered in Napata. And they had another dynasty that lasted for another almost 600 years that was centered in Meroë. So this whole culture that is Kush goes on for 1,000 years after the new kingdom leaves, after ancient Kemet is no longer a part of Kush. They go on for 1,000 years, and they are carrying on the traditions, looking at the old way of looking at our men and looking at the traditions and carrying up their ideas with respect to God for long after the period when the people in Kemet are not doing anymore. So as we start to think about this becomes a significant part in history where this reorganization takes place. And so Alara is the king who's credited with putting that together and credited with starting that Napatan dynasty. So he rules from about 785 BC to about 760 BC, and putting together and unifying this whole area of Upper Nubia is a significant event. And so he becomes one of the founders, if you will, of that dynasty. And then Kashta, who may be his brother, a relative of him in some way, Kashta, who really begins to kick off things in a new direction, another direction. He rules from about 760 BC to about 747 BC. And he not only takes and continues what's happening in Upper Nubia and the kingdom and the dynasty that's been started, he pushes the empire into Lower Nubia. So a lot of times when we think about ancient Kush and we think about Nubia, people just lump black people together. They just lump black people together, and they lump people together, not giving them distinctions, not giving them the rights that they had themselves, the different peoples that were there. We just put them all in a basket, and that was not how things are. Obviously, that's not how things are. People have their own traditions. They may be simple. They may even be family members. They may even be related. They may even have the same heredity, if you will. But there's differences, distinctions with respect to people who were in Lower Nubia at this time and Upper Nubia. There were distinctions. And so Kashta does an amazing thing. He rules and he pushes the Kushite dynasty up into Lower Nubia. And he doesn't just do it into Lower Nubia. He goes into the southern part of Kemet. He goes into Upper Kemet. And when he does that, he really begins to extend the Kushite Empire into Egypt in what is Kemet. And this is during a time, during the third intermediate period after the New Kingdom had fell. And you got to think about this, because at this time in Kemet, there really wasn't like a clear ruler. Kashta becomes a ruler. You have very, very powerful priests at the temple of Karnak, a temple of Amen and Karnak, a temple of Ipet-Sut, very, very powerful priests. And Kashta, who was a Nubian king, takes over. And he takes over that part of southern Kemet. So he's ruling southern Kemet, Lower Nubia, we would call it, as well as Upper Nubia. And that is the kingdom of Kush. And the people in southern Kemet are looking to Kashta as a leader, right? As unifying them and as a leader. So a lot of times when they tell you that the Nubian dynasty, they only want to talk about them with respect to Kemet, and they only want to talk about them if they ruled all of Kemet. Like that to me is just the wrong, even a racist way of looking at it. People's contributions are people's contributions. And Kush was Kush because Kush was Kush. And Kush had Lower Nubia and it had Upper Kemet long before it had Lower Kemet. So, and they were still important. That didn't make them important. They were important already before they even had that as a part of their kingdom, as a part of their empire, if you will. And so then you have Kashta, as I mentioned. He rules from about 760 to 747 BC. And then as you start to take a look at this, and I kind of give you a little more perspective, then you have Piankhy. So King Piankhy is somebody we've talked about quite a bit. We've talked about King Piankhy and just talking about his push for all of Kemet and how he went from the lower part of Nubia up through Upper Kemet, because they had that part already, Middle Kemet, taking that over, and Lower Kemet. But that isn't just why he was important. Part of his documentation of that, part of his victory stela that was there was something significant. It's a piece of history. It's a historic document that's just really, really worth reading. And I'm going to be sharing that with a lot of people very soon. It's an incredible document. It's one of the better pieces of literature, in my opinion, in all of Kemetic history and all of military history, really in all of history, because you look at that, a lot of things pall up to the top. It's a wonderful document in terms of historical significance and the manner in which it's written and what it said about him and what it said about what was important to him, the mercy that he showed, how he went about serving God before he ended up taking over all of Kemet. All of that kind of get into the mind of King Piankhy, and we kind of talked about it a little bit. But King Piankhy comes in around 747 to 712. And notice, so he's king of ancient Kush before he takes over Lower Kemet. So he is still king. He's still taking over. He's still ruling Upper Nubia. He's ruling Lower Nubia. And he is controlling the southern part of Kemet. That's important. A lot of people will say that the 25th dynasty, which these people are part of, people refer to them as 25th dynasty, that they become the 25th dynasty when they take over Lower Kemet, and they push that time, they shorten that time, but they don't even really mention to you how the Kemetic people in the southern part of Kemet looked at the Kushite kings and the Kushite people as one of them. They looked at them as part of them. They didn't see a difference. They were not seen as foreigners. They were not seen as strangers. They were seen as serving the same God, Amen. The whole, significance of Jebel Barka, which is a sacred mountain, a sacred holy site there in what is today modern Sudan, was there was a temple, there was a holy site, and it was considered to be just as holy as Ipet-Sut, the temple at Karnak, the temple of Amen at Karnak. It was considered to be just as holy as that. It was considered to be a significant site, and that was in the Kushite territory. So the people in Upper Kemet, in the southern part of Kemet, they did not see the Nubian people in this 8th century BC. They did not see them as foreigners. They did not see them as bad people. They actually, when they were being threatened by the northern part of Kemet, they actually invited them, said, "Come, hey, King Piankhy, this is your area. You're controlling us. We're expecting you. We're hoping that you will come protect us as a part of your kingdom. Come on, come help us." And so these are, priests and powerful people in the southern part of Kemet looking at and seeing the Kushite people not as foreigners, but as brothers and sisters, and sharing the same God and sharing the same traditions and sharing the same influences. So we don't talk about that, and we shouldn't just take that that Napata dynasty and just take that time when they are ruling all of Kemet and say that's the 25th dynasty of ancient Kemet. That to me is looking at somebody else through somebody else's eyes. This is Kush, and Kush at this time in the 8th century BC, long before it took over the northern part of Kemet, they had the southern part of Kemet, and they were ruling it. And Kashta, Piankhy's dad, helped to bring that into existence. So it wasn't just Piankhy; it was Kashta as well. So Kashta's ruling and Piankhy's ruling in about 747 BC to 712 BC. And so it's an interesting thing because I've talked about in the past, and we'll be talking about more in the future. Meroë was the sister of Piankhy, and she was the daughter of Kashta. And as I mentioned, King Kashta had already had a foothold in the southern part of Kemet before Piankhy was, king, right? And one of the things that Kashta did was, not only did his son succeed him, but he had his daughter set up as God's wife of Amen in Epetsut, in the temple of Amen at Karnak. So the famous temple at Karnak, the very famous, one of the largest, and if at one point in time, the largest religious, facility in the world, at one point in time it was, one of the largest religious facilities in the world, she was the high priestess of. So Meroë, Piankhy's sister, Kashta's daughter, it was akin to being like a high priestess, like a ruler. It was, and when you read the documentation on it, it wasn't like she was some fly-by-night priestess that people didn't talk about or nobody really thought about. She was a significant person in ancient Kemet and ancient Kush. She was at one of the most, or if not the most important temple, and she was in control of the temple. She was supposed to be God's wife, committed to God, committed to Amen, and she had control of a vast amount of territory that was sending her tribute, sending her resources so that she can run the temple, do the things she needed to do. So that God's wife of men was probably the second most or one of the most important physicians or positions in ancient Kemet at this time, outside of the king, right? So you had the king and God's wife of men who, from a religious standpoint, legitimized the king. And so she was Kushite. And so Kashta has his daughter become God's wife of men. She takes over that role in that position at a time when the position is at a time when the position is most important. So Piankhy then he becomes king, and he is ruling, and his sister is God's wife of men, and he eventually puts his daughter Shepenwepet II as God's wife of men. She ends up being adopted by her aunt, and she becomes God's wife of men. So that's another important person to look at is Shepenwepet II. Now King Shabaka, who's the fourth king of this dynasty, this Kushite dynasty, this first Napata dynasty, this Kushite dynasty. King Shabaka is people think the brother of King Piankhy, probably Kashta's son, and maybe not 100% sure, but probably he is the author of the Shabaka stone. So the very famous Shabaka stone, the Memphite theology, which we've talked about, that's King Shabaka. He is the fourth king in this Napata dynasty of ancient Kush, and he rules from about 712 to about 698 BC. And so all these things are kind of moving forward pretty quickly. And then Shabika becomes the next king, and he becomes the fifth king, and he rules for about 8 years or so. And he's of the same Kushite family. Sometimes the relationships are hard to determine, but he's of the same Kushite family, and he's the next king. And then after that, you have Taharqa. And Taharqa, outside of Piankhy, right? Taharqa is probably one of the most famous kings in this line of kings because he does so much. I mean, he's in the Bible, he's in Isaiah, he's in First Kings. He's mentioned as being at the head of the Ethiopian army that comes in and attacks and it faces off against the Assyrian army when the Assyrian army was holding a siege against Jerusalem and Israel. In about the 600s or so BC, King Taharqa is mentioned in the Bible. He's that King Taharqa. He does so many things. He builds so many things and adds so many things at the Temple of Amen, at Jebel Barko in the Sudan, in the northern part of ancient Kemet, at Epetsut. There are things that he adds to it. He becomes a significant king. He rules for a decent period of time. He ruled for a decent period of time before additional battles, because he apparently met the Assyrians more than once in battle. And the first time it appears that he wasn't defeated because he remained king for a certain period of time after that. And it wasn't until the second time that there was somewhat of a defeat by the Assyrian army. And so I want to mention, so Taharqa, he becomes the sixth king of this Napata dynasty, and he ends up having his daughter be adopted by his sister, Shepenwepet, having his daughter. So she was in line to become the next god's wife of my men after her aunt, Shepenwepet II. So you have a number of people, and this goes on. So we'll talk more about them. We'll get more into the second half, if you will, of this Napatan dynasty. But I wanted to share some names with you so that we can remember their names. You know, from a comedic standpoint, from an ancestral standpoint, knowing someone's name is important, and remembering what they brought to the table. So I just want to kind of say their names as we talk about it. Taharka, Shebetka, Shabaka, King Piankhy, Shepenwepet II, Amenadiris, Kashta, Alar. These are all people, Amenadiris the first and Amenadiris the second. These are all people whose names we should know. So I pray that if you have more comments or things you want to share about this, share, because I'm going to get deeper into their lives and deeper into things that they've done. But I kind of wanted to share this first part with you, and I hope you have a great day. God bless you.